Welcome to Experimental, the science show that measures hairy men's fingers and takes blood from young lovers. Coming up, how to turn your urine into wine. Develop a totally new way of moving around and make the perfect sandcastle. But first, it's that loving feeling. Experimental has come to Pisa in search of, you've guessed it, love. Ah, love. It lifts us up where we belong. It turns up the volume of life and makes everything beautiful.
Things that you would otherwise view as being completely irrational and crazy, you think make perfect sense, even if you're not lucid at all.
We all know that love makes us do some odd things. But until neuroscientist Donatella Marazziti from the University of Pisa came along, no one knew why wrapping your arms around the greatest thing in the world made otherwise rational people do the craziest of things. And where did she look for the science of love? Where else but deep in the arms of lovers themselves?
When you are in love, there are different hormonal changes.
That's right. All that crazy behaviour, that kissing, cuddling, giggly stuff that makes love lovely, can be explained by the changes in just a few chemicals.
Are you involved in a love relationship? Yes. Qualcuno?
Sì.
To arrive at this rather miserable reduction of life's greatest state, Donatella compared the blood hormone levels of 3 groups of students for her studies. One, a bunch of singletons. Another group who'd been together in a relationship for over 2 years, and a final group who were the newly in love group, and that's the crazy bunch she was most interested in.
Everything's brighter, everything's bigger. It just like turns up the volume and the vibrance on life because everything's so much better.
Donatella's love group were in the early phases of their relationship, a time when we are preoccupied with our lovers to the exclusion of all else.
When I really fall in love with someone at the very beginning, I ignore everything else.
You can't stop thinking about them. Even, like, I guess waiting around for phone calls is the worst part of it.
I just sat by the phone every day.
You are only interested in the partner, how to meet him or her, how to dress for him or her. So there is an increase in what we call grooming activities.
Like, you want to look your absolute very best when you see somebody, because, I mean, you know, you want them to be absolutely crazy about you like you are about them, and you want to look your best.
So what are the chemicals whizzing around the grey matter that makes a greasy smear on the cheeks so fantastic? When Donatella looked at the blood from her love group and compared it to the singletons and those jaded souls in long-term relationships, she found that her lovers had much higher levels of the hormone cortisol. Oddly, this chemical is a stress hormone designed to make us nervous, which might explain that she loves me not syndrome that so many lovers sweat about. A second brain chemical that went out of whack in the love group was serotonin.
The most exciting finding of our study was that we found that romantic love in the early phase of the relationships present a decreased level of the serotonin system.
Serotonin is, in part, a mood-altering chemical, and the levels Donatella found in her love subjects were so low that if they weren't diagnosed as lovers, they'd be diagnosed as suffering from obsessive-compulsive disorder. But there's another shocker on the way.
Men become in some way more similar to women, and women become in some way more similar to men.
And that's all down to testosterone, the hormone that makes men men. Fall in love, boys, and the chemical that gives you your manhood drops away, explaining that sudden interest in female pursuits, like staring lovingly into another's eyes. Women, however, experience a boost in testosterone, which, luckily, does not make them instantly bearded, but does make them want to do things in bushes that we can't show on television.
Don't try this at home.
In a moment, we'll find out why these girls have abnormally long ring fingers. But first, some vintage fun in the test department. Toby is 5 days into an experiment to monitor every aspect of his health, which was great until he started it. However, since that day, it's deteriorated fast. Today, he's convinced he's got swollen lymph nodes, a definite sign of dengue fever. But on double-checking in the learned journals, he realises that that slightly stiff neck could be a symptom of meningitis instead. Luckily, his temperature is normal, but those sweats, could he be having a heart attack? But then perhaps that cramping pain could be a symptom of type 1 diabetes. And with that latest worry, Toby decides a quick urine test is in order. Huh? Blood in the urine. It can only mean, well, at least 85 conditions, some of them quite nasty. But let's check back through Toby's day to see if we can find the possible cause. Ah, beetroot. It seems that Toby could be one of 14% of the population who are beetroic. When most people eat beetroot, the substance that makes it red, betanin, is destroyed in the stomach. But if scientists are right, the presence of oxalic acid in Toby's stomach means that the betanin survives to get absorbed by the colon and ultimately dissolved in the urine. The result is an impressive colour, very like red wine, which gives Toby the idea of a rather mean joke. Coming up on Experimental, the boffins from Cornell University who think they've discovered a new way of...
Walking
Running.
is like running.
It's like walking.
But first, we go in search of some man digits. Meet Dr. Mark Brosnan, a psychologist at the University of Bath. He's not exactly God's gift to rugby. In fact, he's far more happy lurking in libraries. You could have worked that out for yourself if you'd had a chance to look at his hands.
The ratio of the ring finger to the index finger can potentially tell a great deal about somebody.
That's right. Study someone's fingers and you can tell how much of the hormone testosterone they were exposed to when they were in their mother's womb. Testosterone is the hormone that makes men big, hairy, and square-jawed. But that's not testosterone's only effect.
Exposure to prenatal testosterone is argued to influence the structure of the brain as it's developing within the womb. And that structure of the brain then goes on to inform how we learn and develop in childhood in combination with other factors, but it's provided the building block for what's going on to form the adult brain ultimately.
Testosterone is funny stuff. Not only does a good slug of it in the womb result in the fetus developing what some would call a male brain, but they'll also end up with a ring finger longer than their index finger. Because women in general receive less prenatal testosterone in the womb, they tend to end up with ring and index fingers that are pretty similar in length, and a brain that is less interested in cars and football. Men, on the other hand, tend to have a small difference in the length of the two digits. The bigger hit you got in the womb, and the bigger the difference. It may also be that you'll have developed a brain that is more interested in blokey type things. By now, you're probably looking at your own index fingers and wondering how blokey you are. But look carefully. The average difference between the ring and index finger for a man is only 2%, hence the calipers. And don't worry, ladies, If you find you have a longer ring than index finger, you can still wear a dress. It doesn't mean you're a man. It only means that, like the test department's Melanie here, you may have more of an interest in explosions and other things that men find fascinating. And that's what got Dr. Brosnan thinking. It's often assumed that engineering and physics require a strongly male brain. And if that was the case, you'd expect people working in these sciences to have longer ring fingers than those working in the more, shall we say, effeminate disciplines like the social sciences. To see if this theory held any water, Dr. Brosnan measured the fingers of both sides of the academic divide. 100 digits later, he had an answer, but not the one he expected.
There were some unexpected findings in that the hard sciences, the physicists and the chemists, actually had a digit ratio and the finger length pattern that was typical of females, in that their finger length, the testosterone finger and their estrogen finger, looked to be of a similar length, which counteracted the original arguments that scientists would be extremely male thinking, would have extremely long fourth fingers. Whereas my research was contradicting that and saying, actually, a great deal of scientists have got very long index fingers, more typical of the female profile.
This was rather embarrassing for the idea that a long ring finger was an indication of a male-type brain. So Experimental decided to commission Dr. Brosnan to measure the fingers of these aggressive little creatures, the University of Bath's women's rugby team. Here, there was no problem. Each and every one had a ring finger that towered over their stumpy little index digits.
4. Okay, that's the Premiership finger.
See?
Also means you're a man.
Premiership wife.
Also means you're a man.
Not me here and
It does not. I could be a premiership wife.
And indeed, she is conclusive proof that testosterone can give you a male brain, a male finger, but not necessarily a male body. Still to come on Mad Labs, Billy Bunter plays with nettles. And we learn the science of sandcastle building. But first, what not to do at the dinner table. Anu is meant to be cooking lunch at the test department, but is more interested in demonstrating the strange characteristics of custard, a liquid that behaves like a solid. Don't believe me? Well, let's watch him play. After a brief whisk of the cheap powder variety, it's time to test its liquid properties. And I think we can say that custard is quite definitely a liquid. But what happens when you try and turn it into a ball? Suddenly it turns into a solid. What's happening? Well, it's all got to do with these little fellows, starch molecules. So long as the custard is just pouring out slowly, the starch molecules will slip along quite nicely in a liquid kind of way. But make the custard move too fast, and the starch molecules get tangled up with one another, whereupon the custard turns into a solid. As soon as the custard slows down again, the starch molecules untangle, and the custard behaves like a liquid once more. So next time someone tells you not to hit your dinner with a hammer, just smile and tell them it's an experiment in molecular physics. Before we end, Experimental will be doing strange things with pickled onions and attempting to build the ultimate sandcastle. But first...
Hello!
Experimental has come to Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, in search of these two chaps, Binoy Srinivasan and Andy Ruina, authors of a seminal work in Nature on the most efficient ways of moving from A to B on two legs.
Just ridiculous and sounds silly, but it showed that the least tiring way to get from one place to another if you're going slowly is to walk. And the more tiring way is to run.
All so laughingly obvious, you might say. But when they started analysing their findings in a computer model of the human gait, they made a rather interesting discovery. Their models suggested that there was another gait that was more energy efficient at intermediate speeds between walking and running.
It's sort of like a hybrid of walking and running.
It's like walking.
It's like running.
Is like running.
It's like walking.
It's walking, but with an aerial flight face. Now, you can't really know how to do it unless you put one foot in front of the other. That's very important.
Before we reveal to the world the wonders of this new way of getting from A to B without a taxi, we better find out exactly what goes on when we walk and run. A walk is like an inverted pendulum. Your foot lands, producing a force peak like this. It then pushes off, producing a second force peak. The key to walking is that both feet never leave the ground at the same time. When we run, things are a bit different. Apart from heavy breathing, we actually bounce off the ground, flying between steps. On the computer, this results in a single force peak, like this. And that's what got the boys thinking. According to their computer models, there was another possible gait, the pendular run. The legs would remain fairly straight, like in a walk, the heel hitting the ground, the foot pushing off, but unlike a walk, there would be a short hop, where both feet were off the ground. For speed slightly above walking, this theoretical gait was extremely energy efficient. But could anyone actually do it? Well, it took a lot of practice, but eventually the boys mastered it. A new way of getting from A to B was born. But is it any good?
I don't think that this particular research is going to have any direct applications for anybody. It does have a direct application for science in that it helps us understand what is running, what is walking, and it might be that it helps us understand a new gait which perhaps some people use sometimes.
Experimental disagreed. It seemed to us that getting from A to B faster than walking, but without the puff of running, was a great idea. So we persuaded the profs to hold a masterclass for a man off the street, in the hope that he'd go forth and evangelize this new way of moving.
Relax your upper body and give it a try. Good try, though.
I'm giving up, man. I don't think anybody can do this.
Well, it's not true. I don't know what the this is, but I can do it, and these guys in Michigan can kind of do it, and it seems like you can't do it.
Sadly, it seems we chose the wrong man off the street. In a moment, we'll be finding out how science might help Miss Sandy Feet here avoid this. But first, let's have some pain in the test department. Billy Bunter is in the test department garden doing something very, very stupid in the name of science. He wants to test out a number of supposed cures for common garden stings. And what better person to test them out on but himself? First up, our old friend the nettle. Allegedly, rubbing dock leaves on the sting will give the required relief. And judging from the look on Billy's face, it does seem to help. But why would it? To produce a stinging sensation, the body has to be subjected to either a strong acid or its opposite, a strong alkali. Nettle stings are acidic, so jabbing them with an alkali of roughly the same strength should neutralise the stinging effect. But we think a slightly stronger alkali, like bicarbonate of soda, might work better. Next up, a wasp sting. These are alkali, so don't use bicarb, go for something acidic to neutralise it. Theoretically, nettles might work, but you'd have to get them to sting you only where the wasp stung. Far better, go for something like a pickled onion with its nice, acidic, vinegary sauce.
We'd like to point out that no test department demonstrator was hurt in the making of this film.
They blinking well were.
And finally on Mad Labs, beach science.
Maybe we need some shells.
Pretty much everyone who has ever visited a beach will have had a go at building a sandcastle. But there are some, like Sandy Feet, yes, that is her real name, who take things to extremes.
Everybody can build some kind of a sandcastle. It's not rocket science.
Well, it might not be rocket science to Sandy, but you head inland to Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, and to the labs of Dr. Arshad Kadroli and Dr. Azeda Samadani, and it suddenly becomes rocket science. Their work is all about how each individual grain of sand in a sandcastle sticks together. And the key is this: not water, but the way water forms what they call liquid bridges. The ability of water to stick to individual grains and pull them together.
You can do this while you're sitting at home. You can take some spit, lick it a few times between your fingers, and join it with your thumb and take those fingers apart.
If you look closely,
You'll see a little
small cylindrical,
liquid bridge between, in this case, my finger and my thumb.
and that can introduce extra attraction force between grains.
That is a liquid bridge.
It's the surface tension in water that pulls the grains together. No water and the grains of sand will behave just like little balls, which will run freely downhill. Add a bit of water and the liquid bridges form, sticking the grains together. So it's water that makes grains of sand stick together. The big question, though, is how much water you need to create the stickiest sand possible. Too much, and you get an unstable gloop. Too little, and this happens.
Oops.
You might think that a sandcastle falling down is no big deal, but imagine if this was the side of a mountain. Hundreds of tons of earth or sand crushing down into a village. It happens. And studying why it happens on a granular level is the true purpose of their work.
So if you look at the sand in desert, you can see that the angle is much lower, and if you look at the sandcastle, the angles are much higher.
We are trying to determine the basic equations, basic models, which will help us determine the conditions under which granular materials will flow or be stable.
So what is the magic formula for a sandcastle? Well, it turns out that it's 1 part of water to every 8 parts of sand.
They stick to each other, they form those liquid bridges between each other, and effectively the size of the grains now increased, and therefore they cannot flow as easily. So this is a granular jamming.
And what does Sandy Feet think of this application of science to her art?
Well, you know, theory is nice. Labs are nice. We need science to explain our world to us.
In the future, we would like to study the real sand and see if you mix water with real sand, what happens, and perhaps you get much higher angles than what we observe here.
We do not quite know how to apply this directly to real sand yet.
For real world experience, I mean, if you really want to figure out what makes sand stand, you gotta get to the beach, you gotta get sand in your socks, you gotta get dirty.
She's got a point, but you also need people in labs. People who understand why your sandcastle stands up or doesn't.